because people can come in during the introductions. So my name's Jane Yates, and I'm an associate tutor at Cumbria Development Education Centre, and we've also got Lucy Graham here today, who's from CDEC as well, and Lucy's going to be putting links in the chat as we go along. If you've got any questions, because it's quite a large group, it's quite hard for me to keep track of everybody, but perhaps what might be a nice thing to do first of all is just to introduce yourselves in the chat and just say you know, where you're from. If you haven't put it on your name, it's quite good to keep that. We will keep a copy of the chat which we send out, so if people put any extra links on there, you'll get everything from the session. Okay, so there's just a couple more people in now. We're up to 40 now, I think. Okay, so this session, just checking, because it's easy, isn't it, with Zoom to go into, you might end up in the wrong session. So just to say, it is storytelling as a tool for wellbeing. We had some orienteers that came into one of the CDEC sessions by mistake the other day. That was quite funny in a way. Yeah, it's just worth checking that you're in the right session. Okay, so just we've already covered this. Put your first name, your school organisation, and as I said, we love a friendly face. It's nice to be able to see people, particularly in the breakout rooms. If you want to say hi in the chat box or ask any questions, do. I probably won't be following the chat, but Lucy will pick up any questions, and when you're in breakout rooms, we'll have a look as well. Yeah, if we won't be sort of taking questions verbally, but I will be around a little bit at the end if people do want to come off mute in the gallery and ask a particular question there. Okay, so the aim of this workshop is really for you to find out about the Sankofa storytelling project and how that worked with students and teachers. And I was involved in the project, not in a huge way, but I was involved at the beginning of the project and at certain points along the way. And I appreciate some of you may have been on one of the other two workshops on storytelling and anti-racism and storytelling and gender. So you may have had a bit of this introduction already, so apologies for that. But the session also is about understanding how the storytelling methodology can explore issues that are relevant to us today. And at the end of the session, we're going to be sharing the actual resources from the Sankofa Storytelling Project. And there's a teacher's guide, there's 2 resources that you can access. But also throughout the whole session, we'll be sharing other resources as well for storytelling and wellbeing. So just to give you a little bit of background, the reason that the project was called Sankofa, it's from Ghana, Twi language, and how it translates, if you like, it's sort of one of those kind of untranslatable words in a sense. We don't have there isn't a word equivalent in English, but there is a phrase, and the phrase would be translated, "Go back and get it." And so through the project, and actually it's interesting, if you Google Sankofa, there are other projects, storytelling projects. It seems to be it's a really good name for a project. Through the project, we looked back at one of the most ancient forms of human storytelling. That idea that it's a vessel to pass on wisdom and values for a better life. And through the project, we looked at stories across the world, and I'll talk about the partners that were involved, both the stories in the past, but also stories for the future that help hopefully move us towards a more hopeful and sustainable future for all. So that's a little bit of background about the project name. So it was very much about storytelling for a better world. So the project involved teachers, so that there was teachers were involved in training. Before that, the project team worked together to develop the learning guide and the teachers' resources, and then we worked with the teachers, and then the teachers worked with their students, and they worked with stories from their own or other cultures. They include concepts, values, and skills of critical thinking. The students also practice storytelling skills, and actually we did we did as well. We as practitioners on the project, that was one of the first things that we did. We had professional storytellers in the team, and we all practiced storytelling skills as well. So I don't profess to be an expert in storytelling, but it's a skill that I've really valued picking up on the project. But within our project, we do have professional storytellers. So also we created news stories around global themes that contributed to this theme and this vision of a more sustainable future. So, as I said, there were it was involved international partners. It was an Erasmus-funded transnational project, and it involved partners and young people from 3 countries. So there was Cumbria Development and Education, which is if you're not sure where Cumbria is, my children, my teenagers told me the other day, nobody knows where Cumbria is. So it's just in the north of England, just before the border into Scotland. I actually live about 20 minutes from the Scottish border, so we're up there in the northwest of England, if my teenagers are right that nobody knows where Cumbria is. The other partner was the Global Learning London in Tower Hamlets in London, who we'd worked with before, and also SEVA in Czech Republic and Sosna in Slovakia. So it was a great team working together on this project, and it involved partners visiting each other to sort of further develop the project. So it was a big project and great one to be involved with. So I'm going to start with a story. I'm going to tell you a story. Here's a picture. This is one of my photos in the Middle East. And I thought, well, we'll recreate sitting around a fire. So actually one of my philosophy for children colleagues that's sat on the other fire. And this was a really memorable occasion for me, and it seems fitting that I'm going to read you this story now. So now, this is not my story to tell, but it's a story first told by a 13th century Persian Sufi poet, Suft al-Din Atta of Nishtval. So there was a Persian king who asked a group of wise men, and I think I'll change that bit to wise people instead, since the story's a fable. So the Persian king asked the group of wise people for a ring that would make him happy when he was sad, and sad when he was happy. The wise people debated many, many hours. They disagreed and they agreed, and until they came up with this phrase: "This too shall pass." And this is what they etched inside the ring. The wise people said that whatever way you look at how you're feeling, things will always change. And I think the reason I've chosen that story to start, it's quite a common phrase. It's that story. I've chosen the sort of version starting in Persia, but you'll find it in other cultures, in other religions as well. So it's not, it's a real great story that's been passed down through generations, and as a phrase too, "This too shall pass." And I think it has real relevance for storytelling as a tool for well-being as well. This idea of the pain that we might have, it can also be an agent of change. If we build the walls around it, it remains untouched and alive inside us. And it's that movement, if you like, between the poles of the past and the future that we adapt. And this book that I'm actually reading at the moment, that has the title "This Too Shall Pass." If you Google "This Too Shall Pass," lots of books have that title, interestingly, and it's a sort of a theme in stories, in a sort of therapeutic way as well. This idea that, as soon as you're happy, you're going to be sad, and as soon as you're sad, you're going to be happy. So it's a really interesting story to share. So on the project, it wasn't all about sitting around a fireside. It was actually digital. The title of the project was Digital Storytelling, a digital storytelling project. So we looked at stories in broadest sense. And that was one of the very first things that we did. We explored together this idea that we're constantly telling stories. You know, my daughter's just about to come home from her second day at school. You know, she'll be full of stories of how school was, what it was like to wear a mask all day. You know, films that we watch, news that we watch, texting, books. Life is surrounded by stories, and probably more so over the last sort of 12 months with the pandemic, that kind of telling of stories. So I've read this book a couple of weekends ago. I don't know if anyone's Chinua Achebe, a Nigerian writer, and it really moved me, this story. It sort of was such a powerful story. And I think Alia, interestingly shared this quote on her presentation: people create stories, create people, or rather stories create people, create stories. But what I noticed when I was reading this book was the quote. Nelson Mandela read this story when he was in prison: the writer in whose company the prison walls fell down. And I'm sure all of you've all experienced that potential for story, a really good, powerful story, how it makes you feel everything else that's going on in your life around you. It feels like that the walls fall down and you get absorbed in it. So it kind of is can be a lifting thing. And I've got another example of a story now. So last weekend I was scrolling through, I don't know which social media, probably Facebook, and this story jumped out at me. It's not, I'd never seen it before. It's not but I know it's been on social media for a while, so some of you may have seen it. And it's about a man from Australia who's unfortunately now dead. He was Australia's oldest man at 109. And he, in his later life, he knitted jumpers for penguins, for the Phillip Islands Penguin Foundation, in the event of an oil spill. And it just, I saw this picture on Facebook and it really lifted me. There was something, it just appealed to lots of aspects: the age of the man, the penguins. There was lots of things in this that lifted me, and I felt this sort of emotional feel of lifting. And I'd had quite a stressful week working on Zoom, and it was just a real feel-good story. So that was my example. And what I'd like you to do now is we're going to go into breakout rooms for 5 minutes in threes, with 1 minute where you'll be asked, you've got a countdown. It'll give you a 60-second countdown, so you don't need to come back straight away. Let it just bring you back. And then when you've introduced yourself and explained why you've come on this workshop, then share a mood lifting story with the group. Let's get in a really good place for this session, a mood lifting story. So it may be a meme, it may be a Facebook post, maybe something you read in the news, or something that happened to you, or someone that you know, something that really is a sort of a mood lifting thing. Doesn't necessarily have to be funny. You know, my penguin example wasn't necessarily funny, but there was a sort of a mood lifting side of it. Okay, so Lucy's going to send you off. You will be asked to join a particular group, and then when you come back, I'd like you just to share your story in the chat if you want to. That's optional, but if you want to share it, or you can mention a story that you heard from somebody else that you really liked in your group. Okay, so see you in 6 minutes. Everyone back now?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so if you'd like to, in the chat, just write down, we've got some examples there already. What was your mood lifting story, or one that you heard? I love that, the cat that decides to take a nap on the top of a train to London. Oh dear, I hope the cat was okay. So as I said, you will get these this chat sent in an email. Okay. Positive stories about trainees, children in my class, in their classes. That's great. Friend getting a pay rise, yeah. And it's nice, isn't it, when we hear other people, you know, stories, good things that are happening to other people. That can be a real mood lift, not just necessarily ourselves. Obviously, it's a mood lift to ourselves, but there's something about hearing good news can be for others that can be good. Mood lifting. Signs of spring. Squeeze my car past a lorry on the way home. Oh, I got out. Instead of getting angry, I got out and asked for help. Great compliments from our library customers. We've got such a range of people here today from all sorts of different schools and organisations. I won't be able to read all these out. A ballerina, former ballerina with dementia who remembered all the choreography to Swan Lake when her carer played her the music. Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so lots of stories there, and it's great to have these. It'd be good to share these. Seagull, Jonathan Livingston. Yes, I remember reading that book. So would say other times is nothing more than your thought itself. A form you can see break the chains of your thought, and you break the chains of your body too. That's a nice quote. Okay, so lots of mood lifting story with the group, and that was just really an icebreaker. You will be going back into those groups later on to do another activity. So I'll just go on to the next slide. Okay, so you will get all of these slides as well. So this is something that I've put together. So, you know, there is growing evidence. It's not, you know, the impact of storytelling as a therapeutic tool for mental health and well-being isn't just something that we've, you know, that's been happening recently. It's well known and growing, even more growing evidence across all sectors, including education, health and business. And I've just pulled out 3 examples here. You know, there's a lot more. So this is sort of my research, if you like. So there is research around the use of storytelling with dementia patients, for example, how it can improve mood, help calm patients down, and even continence. And we had a question when I ran this session last time. Oh, what is that? So that's from the University of Missouri, a project called Time Slip. But I've read about this project and this research in NHS, but you know, I've read it in other. They seem to stem back to that particular research. So also employment, often businesses and other employments will use storytelling as a way of building a supportive employee culture, that valuing of storytelling and other perspectives. It's also used in the classroom, helping young people to relax, communicate feelings and emotions. And my daughter, who's she's nearly 17, I remember she struggled to sleep, and we used a storytelling device, something called Relax Kids, as a way of helping her to sleep. That really worked. Helped her to relax. Some of you have maybe heard of that. And the impact in terms of storytelling is on well-being is from both hearing stories and telling stories as well. And I've gone into a little bit more detail here. The diagram in the middle is a tool that was developed, and we have it in a pack that I'm going to show you later. And the idea is that you in order to look after others' well-being, you need to look after yourself as well. And it comes from this idea of the concept of a medicine wheel from indigenous cultures, this medicine wheel: thinking, feeling, doing and believing. And I'll show you a pack where you can find out more about this particular tool. But I thought it worked really well with thinking about storytelling. This idea that storytelling can impact on thinking. So it activates the hippocampus area of the brain where stories are stored. There's an intellectual side to storytelling that can help people learn about themselves and other people. But it also, people that are involved in storytelling projects, it can involve different ways of knowing others and how people learn to listen as well. In terms of the feeling dimension, that emotional side, stories will often involve emotions. So they can express joys and challenges. Through storytelling projects, it may be that people form new bonds and friendships through the power of story. There might be a spiritual element, that sometimes stories can deeply touch people through shared beliefs, values, and life lessons. And finally, this sort of doing side, the hands, and this is something I'm going to talk about later, this idea that through storytelling we can create legacy and build that strong sense of community. And I've just put the little logo of the NHS, the National Health Service, here in the UK, and just an example of one of the projects that they've got, Voices of COVID-19. So they've been collecting stories as part of a health project, so you can look that up. That was just to remind me, there's all sorts of projects. We have quite a lot in here in Cumbria, where people have been collecting COVID-19 stories as part of legacy and building community. So, just move that on. So this is something that I've developed in response to the project. So Wellbeing wasn't part of the Sankofa project at all, actually, which is interesting. But yet when the pandemic started, we quickly saw that as we did more work around wellbeing in another one of our projects, we quickly saw that storytelling was a key part of that. So this is a sort of a strand that is developed over in the last 12 months. And what I've got by this diagram is just the different aspects, if you like, of how storytelling can act as that tool. So that top one there, and I'm going to go through all of these examples. We've already thought about, get through the this too shall pass, the kind of mood lifting, and that long, getting through the moods. So that the concept of this too shall pass, it can help as a tool. But also storytelling can help us make sense of the bigger issues in life, and maybe those bigger issues are ones that are troubling us. So that can be helpful as that trying to make in a making sense kind of way. Storytelling can be used for self or group reflection, so it's as a reflective tool, as I've mentioned already, about capturing legacy and leading to transformational change. Stories might have that impact as a tool, and I've just put it in a circle. I just thought it was an interesting way of seeing it, because they all connect together, and they're not in a particular order. One might lead to the other, but there's a sort of a sense that storytelling as a tool for well-being is a sort of process. So I'm going to go through some of those examples through some of our other projects, and as I said, we had this storytelling Sankofa project, and then the pandemic started. And Alia, who some of you may have met on the anti-racism and Sankofa and storytelling workshop, Alia and we got together and we developed a series of films called Storytelling in the Time of Corona, just a few weeks into the first lockdown that we had here in the UK. And basically Alia chose stories and developed and created little 3 to 5 minute videos, and they had themes that were relevant to the experiences that we were going through, and the discussions that people were having, the conversations. So what I'd like you to do now, before I talk a little bit more about this project, is I'd like you to have a look at the list of themes. Okay, and just pick out 3 and write in the chat that you think of a group of people you regularly discuss with during the last 12 months, and which themes, and that might be family members, that might be friends, that might be work colleagues or neighbours, whoever, it might be 2 people or a group. Which 3 themes did you discuss during the last 12 months? And that'd be interesting to see. So those are the themes that our stories mainly covered, but yeah, write down 3 themes in the chat and let's have a look. And I'll just have a look at those. and not doing very well keeping the chat. Okay, so that's social distancing, distance, family, death, emotions, crying. Yeah, and I think you'll see when I show you the films, the kind of order of the films, as time went on, particularly from last March, we kind of needed new stories to help us make sense of those big issues in life. So yeah, family, and there were some themes that were constant, and then other themes. So the kind of stockpiling, and that was a really common theme at the beginning of lockdown, that lots of people were discussing. But it left. It wasn't something that people discussed. So that's great to see. And community, yeah, and so some of those themes, they kind of, they lasted throughout the last 12 months, and probably you're still talking about them and trying to make sense of these big issues in lives. So what we developed, so we had I think there was about 10 films altogether, and a lot of the stories were different. There were maybe 3-part stories. There were 3 separate films, and you'll see in the order that was how they developed as different themes came into people's conversations. And the original idea for these resources was actually for families that were harder to reach, that maybe weren't accessing the work from school in where Alia was based in Tower Hamlets, that maybe having a film which they could access on YouTube, or it was easy, or WhatsApp, they could forward it on. And that was sort of our thinking, but actually they ended up being used by all sorts of people. So that was some of the examples. So they're still there on the website for people to use, and still being used. And we're going to have a look at one particular story, which was the second sort of series that we did, A Tale of Two Villages. And what you'll see at the end of each story, and this is the same structure for every film. There was a structure of questions, and again, this was to keep a familiar structure. One of the feedback we got from teachers very early on during the pandemic, with everyone was sort of busy creating resources for schools and things, and so much was out there, is that we got feedback from teachers that actually having a familiar structure with resources was really helpful for children. So that we had 3 questions, so that after each story or part of the story, there was always a what next question. There was always a thinking about the story question, and then a thinking beyond the story question. And my background, as some of you will know here, is in philosophy for children, which is a process we very much use at Cumbria at CDEC. So it was linked. It wasn't all philosophy, but those of you who've done philosophy for children training will see this idea of a thinking beyond the story question is very sort of philosophical, if you like. So I'm going to show you the video now of this one. So it's the first part, and then we're going to put you into breakout rooms, and really it's up to you which question you want to discuss. You may discuss 2 of the questions, but have an opportunity to think about the story and to think about those questions. So it might be that you talk about, well, where was the man on the horse going? And those questions were ones that maybe children hadn't really thought about. That was the idea behind that question. Oh, I didn't never thought about where he was going. I was just thinking about the story. So there was kind of to make them think in a different way about where the story might go next. The thinking about the story one we've got here is it really our fate as human beings to forget? And there's in the story, you'll see why that question's asked. And then the thinking beyond the story, if you are together a lot with friends and family, then does that mean you are less connected when you're apart? So when you've watched it, you choose, and I'm going to just get it on now, you choose which questions you discuss in your group. So can I just ask Lucy, can you see the film now?
Yes, I can see.
Yeah, okay. Sometimes in Zoom it doesn't go over. Okay, and just can you raise your hand if you can hear it, and then I know.
There was once a village in which every human who ever existed lived. and they lived happily. I mean, they had some of the same problems we have. Things were sometimes unfair, sometimes they argued, sometimes they even said mean things to each other. But generally speaking, they were happy. One day, a crack began to appear in the back garden of one of the houses. And this crack, it grew and it grew and it tore at the ground, and it grew and it grew and it tore at the ground, and it tore at the ground, and it grew and it grew until it had ripped the earth right through the middle of the village into a valley. And the village became two villages perched on top of two mountain tops, through which a valley ran through. But the villagers didn't forget that they came from the same village, and it became a running joke between them that theirs was the original village and that the other one had broken off. And the years passed. And you know how sometimes with friends and family, you don't remember events quite in the same way? Who ate the most chocolate? Who arrived late? How late they were? Well, you see, the word for human in Arabic is insan, and the root of the word is nasa, to forget. It is our fate as human beings to forget. And that was what happened to villages. Time erased their memories of their traditions, and soon enough, they started to build their houses out of different materials. They started to dress their bodies in different clothes. They started to cook their food in different spices. And even their dialects changed. The way they rolled their R's and hissed their S's. But what stayed between them is that space. The space between people where meaning hisses and sizzles and fizzes into being. One day, as the sun was setting against a purple sky and the villagers were preparing their dinner, the distinct sound of clanking pots and pans ringing through the air, a man in a cloak rode his horse through the valley. And the people of the East Village saw him, and the people of the West Village saw him. But what they saw was not the same. What next? Where do you think the man on the horse was going? And thinking about the story, is that true? Is it really our fate as human beings to forget? And thinking beyond the story, if you are together a lot with friends and family, then does that mean that you are less connected when you are apart? Over to you.
Okay, so over, got something to get out of it here.
Well.
Okay, is that still on the screen, Lucy? Yeah, okay. So over to you, as Alia says. You're going to have 6 minutes in the breakout room. So think about share the question you'd like to speak about. And it maybe you spend the whole time just talking about one of the questions that appeals to you. And yeah, trying to grapple with the big issues, trying to make sense with big issues. And hopefully it will be a good experience for you working with your group that you already know. So see you in 6 minutes. So I'm going to share the screen again, okay? And when you go on to this link, you'll see the kind of the group that they're all in, Global Learning London. You'll be able to click on that, the little icon on YouTube, and then you can see all of the films as well. I was just saying to Lucy then how this was, for me, working on this storytelling in the time of Corona. That was literally what got me through those first few months, because all my work just stopped overnight. I wasn't teaching in a school as I am now. And you know, it was like, oh, I don't know what to do, but I want to sort of do something to help teachers. So this storytelling project that with Alia doing this, it kind of helped. It was, you know, that legacy, and it helped us through during that time. And it was a really creative thing to do as well. So. And we did try to keep it going throughout the last 12 months, and we did try to get some funding. We weren't successful with that. We're ever hopeful. But the good news is that we actually managed to put the Tale of Two Villages story into a teaching pack that I was involved with writing with the British Council later on in the summer. So, and it's a pack for mental health and wellbeing. At the moment, it's an online resource, but we've just written it up as a teacher's pack, so it will be like a PDF, and there's a bit more detail in the teacher's pack. It's free to use. Lucy, I'm sure, will put the link in the chat. But the Tale of Two Villages is in the step 5, give. And those of you who are familiar with the 5 ways, so the resource we've developed is sort of structured around the 5 ways to well-being: connecting, take notice, keep learning, be active, and give. And so it was great to put the Tale of Two Villages in the give lesson. So as part of that lesson, the students look at each of the 3 films, and there's other activities around that. So, and that was a pack for 7 to 14-year-olds, but I do know it's been used with you know, is ideas for younger or older children. That was just the nature of the commission. So that's another resource for you. And you can also read about how the medicine wheel fits into that pack, and there's an activity that gets young people to develop their own medicine wheels as well. And one of the things that we've put in the teachers resource is actually top tips for mental health and wellbeing for teachers as well. So that's there. So that's another resource. And then I want to spend some time thinking about another project that we developed over the pandemic, and in terms of how we use storytelling as a reflective tool for wellbeing. So one of the things that CDEC did right at sort of at the beginning of the pandemic, we were getting schools asking us, could you create a space online to bring back the teaching staff, well, all the staff in school, and how they would think about what it would be like when the children went back. This was in the first lockdown that we had. So we very rapidly, it was like almost like a rapid response team. We put together a sort of a bespoke training program, depending on what the schools needed, a toolkit, and the project was called CARE. Well, it's still called CARE because we're still running it now, and that stands for Compassionate and Restorative Education Approach. And it was about working with teachers to help young people to become more resilient learners and active, compassionate citizens of the future. And I could talk for an hour about the project or more, but I'm just going to focus in on the storytelling part of it. Because we developed all this expertise with the Sankofa project, we were then able to bring it into the CARE project. And, you know, I think moving forward with CDEC, you know, storytelling, like philosophy for children, is going to be a tool, you know, is something that's going to be very much embedded in future projects as well. So how we used it with teachers and with the students in their schools was this idea of looking back, so helping children to reframe and revalue the experience that they'd had, to look at the present, so reclaiming the children, and this is going to be happening. Some of our schools that did CARE in the summer, some of those ways that they did that after the summer, they're going to be using those strategies again. So reclaiming the children, the friendships, the school community, acknowledging that things have changed. And then another aspect as a reflective tool, looking forward, thinking about what to keep from the experience, but what new learning to use, and building resilience and skills for the future. So We had a metaphor of a boat. We used that in our training, and quite a lot of schools really liked that. I think being in the Lake District, we've got a lot of lakes, and we've got a big coast with a lot of our schools as well. So we like this metaphor of the boat, this idea that we'd all been on a journey, albeit maybe in different boats, didn't experience it in the same way. But this idea of a journey, we could look back at the past, the present and future stories. And so I'm just going to share with you some of the legacy work that we did around storytelling. So as I said, quite a few schools like this idea of a boat metaphor, and we took up this idea of a CARE Afloat Creative Project. So there were different aspects of CARE, and one was creative projects in schools. And so children did all sorts of different creative projects, sometimes working with artists, professional artists, or sometimes doing it with the staff at school. So this one on the left from High Heskett School near Carlisle, they had all the children reflecting creatively about their journey. And I don't know if you can see on the wall there, there's one of the things I really liked. I liked some of the cartoon things they did, but I really liked this idea of developing a captain's log or a ship's log about their journey. That's the sort of slightly yellow. I think they put tea on them to make them look authentic. That was I really like that idea that they did for older children, where they really captured that legacy of the stories of the pandemic. St Herbert's School in Keswick, again, they developed this idea of a float as well with CDEC, and actually all of the work that they captured ended up going into an exhibition in the museum. They worked with a professional artist, and that was, the general public could see that. So that was a great outcome. And it was all over the museum, but this is just one example where the children wrote their reflective thoughts about their experience of the pandemic on that boat that they created as well. So in phrases, and I don't know if you can read there, it says, "This storm will pass," I think soon. So new boat, same sea. So there were all sorts of metaphors there. And metaphor was a key part of the project that we developed with the creative care spaces. And as you can see from the little diagram there, we've got, so the care programme had a community focus in terms of legacy, but it also had a teacher focus and pupil focus as well. And the second last example I want to show you from the legacy is, this was a secondary school, Oldswater Community College in Penrith. We had 4 secondaries involved in the summer term working on the CARE programme, and we developed a 6-week PSHE series of lessons that they then did back in September when they went back to school. And the pupils all went in Key Stage 3, went through that, and some of the older pupils. But I've just pulled this one out. I think it's really interesting how they used it in Year 9 as actually an assessment piece. And they had the children, after their 6 weeks of lessons, care lessons, one of the tasks was to write a letter to your grandchildren explaining the events of the COVID-19 pandemic, reflecting on the events of the lockdown and the positive and negative challenges it brought to you in 2020. And it's interesting to see that, and I think that's a really I've yet to see the examples because they're still in school and from last December, and the teacher hadn't been able to get them, but I know they're really good, they're really powerful examples. I'm looking forward to see these, but that's interesting to see how it fitted into their assessment framework at the end of the autumn term. I'm just going to finish with this couple of slides, this quote, and I guess it sums up really about this idea of storytelling as a tool for well-being. Famous laureate Kazuo Ishiguro, Japanese author, just had a book out last week that I've started reading, which is called Clara and the Sun. But his quote I really like. It doesn't say it in that book, but he said, but in the end, stories are about one person saying to another, "This is the way it feels for me. Can you understand what I'm saying? Does it also feel this way for you?" And so there's the storytelling model. And just final little quote. This time last year, actually, well, in 2019 and 2018, I was sharing this quote on training with governors usually, about what we're preparing children for. And I found this recently when I was looking through, and it really struck with me, that this bit at the end in bold, but they will also have to manage challenges that we have not yet imagined. And I think, we would have never imagined the last 12 months. And we maybe never imagined the focus on good health and well-being that we need, Sustainable Development Goal 3. So I think that's a really sort of powerful quote to think back to the year ago. And I think we're going to be thinking about well-being and the pandemic for a good while yet. So resources, Lucy will put in the link, the Sankofa website. So there's a teacher's learning guide that gives practical ways for teachers and students, but there's also a teacher's toolkit, which is a resource bank of activities, and they've all been tried and tested with teachers. Oh, that's currently in production, but that one, watch that space for the toolkit as it comes on. There are some activities on the website that you can click on. So the final thing I'd like you to do is to click on the link, and I'd like you to just spend a minute or so filling in the evaluation form. It's really helpful for us thinking about future projects and in terms of this session as well. And do look at the website. If anyone wants to unmute and say hello, you can. But I'm going to stop sharing the screen. You've got the link in the chat. That'd be great if you can fill that in. But yeah, if anyone wants to say hello, feel free to. I think I've stopped sharing, haven't I? I hope you feel a bit more, you feel lifted by the session and strategies. And it's been nice to see some familiar faces and lots of new faces too. And yeah, I'm just going to pick up the chat, see if there's anything in there. Do please, be in touch with CDEC if there's anything that I've mentioned that you're interested in as well. You'll get the slides with the chat, and yeah, there will be live links in the slide. Yeah, I've made them hyperlinked. I like that. Planted some new ideas. Yeah, I mean, as I said at the beginning, I'm not a year ago I was neither a storytelling or a mental health and well-being, but it's become a toolkit added to my own toolkit. Off to feed children. Yes.